Orale! Bienvenidos and welcome to the Familia FFE podcast. This is your host, Jorge Martin. Familia, we are on YouTube. Please make sure to give us a like and subscribe. This NFL Insider series is just rolling and rolling and rolling like the river. I mean, I'm telling you, it is going great. And we're getting so many great invitados, like our amigo here who's to my side, who I'm about to introduce. Make sure you set those notifications so that you can get these coming out, because they're going to be coming out almost daily, pretty much now until all the way till training camp. Get Familia FFB on YouTube, and also make sure you're going to underdogfantasy.com when you do your first deposit up to $100 and you use the promo code Familia23. We're gonna match you up to the first $100. Familia, best ball is just taking it's all the rage right now. Everybody who's anybody in the game is playing it, and you can win money. You could do a draft now and win money in January. Gotta love it. And you get better for your redraft leagues. Again, Familia 23 or Familia 23 if you want to do it in Spanish. Make sure you use that promo code. All right. And also, we've been getting so many great return guests, invitados to our show. And we've got another one right here. I mean, Matthew Coller has just been fantastic. I mean, the great work. He's done so much great work with purpleinsider.com. His Twitter, you can find all his content at Matthew Coller. He's also got a book out on Pro Football Focus that I'm going to let him promote the heck out of it right now. He's got so much great stuff. Familia, welcome in, bienvenido to the Purple Insider himself, Matthew Coller. Bienvenido, my friend. Estás en tu casa.
Yeah, thanks for having me back on the show. It's always good when you get invited back. That means it wasn't a disaster the first time. So I appreciate you having me. And I'm excited to talk about this. I was kind of thinking about how funny it is that in the fantasy world, we get into late June, early July, things start to ramp up. People get excited about those drafts. And for reporters like myself, it's like, when does training camp start? Like, can we get on to something? I'm kind of just squeezing the blood from the stone here with content leading up to training camp. But it's good, though, and I'm excited to talk with you about it.
Well, it was great. And, when we talked last year, I mean, you read the tea leaves well on a lot of things. And you know what? Let's just jump into it, because, you've still got Kevin O'Connell, again, in his second year in this offense. You got Kirk Cousins. He's not the sexiest player out there, but all he seems to do is give you production. He's top 12 quarterback the last 3 seasons, actually top 11. Last year he was number 7 overall with 29 touchdowns, over 4,500 yards. Really just more of the same with him. And is it kind of beneficial that he gets the Chicago and Green Bay coming to Minnesota in the back half of the season, when it could be, it could have been pretty rough before?
Yeah, there's no question about that. I think in a lot of recent years, they've had to travel to Chicago and to Green Bay when it wasn't very nice. I think, what was it, last year? It was the final 2 weeks of the season having to travel those places. And one of the games he only played a little bit at the end. And I'm sure for fantasy that was already, I'm sure you throw out a lot of week 18 stuff, but the Green Bay game was kind of a nightmare for him. And it often is for the Vikings when they have to go down there in January. I remember looking back, their record was not very good. So yeah, they do have a little bit of a beneficial schedule and situation for Kirk Cousins this year. I think maybe not trying to project so much the defenses, but project what it's going to look like with Kevin O'Connell in year 2. One thing that we realized in year 1 is that it is a massive change from Mike Zimmer to Kevin O'Connell in their general approach. Kevin O'Connell is a former NFL quarterback who came from Sean McVay. He wants to throw the football. And not only that, but he has the best receiver on earth, and he wants to throw him the football, which makes a lot of sense to me. And so they really leaned into the passing game in Kirk Cousins last year. I think they were top 3 in terms of pass attempts, top 3 in terms of run pass ratio. They're also going to be, like last year, in a lot of games where they have to throw the football, because if you look at their schedule, they're playing all 4 teams from championship weekend last year. They're playing Mahomes, they're playing Burrow, they're playing Hurts. I mean, there's a lot of good quarterbacks on this schedule, and we don't know what, Jordan Love or Justin Fields are going to look like. But if those guys are even decent, so if Fields takes a step up, you could end up with a very weak and transitioning defense from kind of the old guys that they moved on from to tons of young players all over. You could end up with a lot of teams scoring 28 to 40 points against the Vikings, which means that they're going to have to match them with passing the football. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see another 600 pass or plus season from Kirk Cousins. And the other thing is that fantasy players certainly love from Kirk Cousins is that he is always healthy. And I'll knock on wood for Vikings fans. I don't want to jinx it, but I mean, he plays every game. He knows how to protect himself, how to take care of his body, and how to stay healthy. And even though he took a lot of hits last year, I also thought that he showed a remarkable toughness and got back up every single time. And the guy does dress like Optimus Prime a little bit on game day, where he's just got, rib protectors and big shoulder pads and everything else. But he stays healthy. He knows how to get rid of the football. And I think that having that combination of things should make him a very good statistical quarterback. And I don't know if that's going to mean them winning 13 games again. I don't think that's going to happen, especially with all the things that they did with their roster. But from a statistical perspective, he is about the most consistent and reliable quarterback that exists in the NFL. I mean, I can't think of any historical quarterbacks who year after year, you could almost plug in exactly the statistical ranges of this guy. And even the low end has been pretty good for Kirk Cousins.
Yeah, it's kind of like reminding me of prime Matt Ryan in a lot of ways. Just, I mean, that's the thing. You could just mark him down, 4,500 TDs, 4,500 yards and about 30 TDs. And definitely better at home. I mean, I talked to you before, and Familia, you guys have heard it before. And if you haven't checked it out, make sure you check out both the Goff Cousin Hermanos QB strategy video and also the article the companion article that I wrote on it. Just starting those guys at home is money in the bank, and you guys can load up your roster early on. So I love, and especially I love getting the Bears and the Packers there at the end of the season, because gosh, I mean that was the reason why last year I had Justin Jefferson as my number 2 player, not the number 1 overall player, because I didn't like that week 17 matchup against the Packers. And kind of, I hated being right, but I was right.
They didn't wear the right cleats in that game, and they were sliding all over the place. Yeah, it was cleat gate or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, that is an interesting thing. And also when you talk about playing at home, there's the comfort of the home crowd. There's the Justin Jefferson on the fast track, not only him, but adding Jordan Addison to it, which I'm sure we'll get to. And TJ Hockenson was a great fit, but they're also playing, I mean, not just Mahomes, but also Justin Herbert coming to US Bank Stadium as well. So you're playing these teams that are going to put up points against the Vikings, and they're going to have to match them with Kirk Cousins. So, unless there is a surprise injury or some massive fall off, which, I mean, I guess your perspective on this might be better than mine. Quarterbacks of a certain age, if they're elite, don't seem to fall off, until they're 40. But Cousins is not elite. And there have been quarterbacks like Joe Flacco, Jay Cutler, who are kind of that middling quarterback, even Matt Ryan, who I think is a better overall quarterback historically than Cousins. They do have some times where they reach this cliff and all of a sudden they fall off the side of it. And we go, what the heck happened to that guy? And it was just age. Now, seeing him in minicamp, I don't see anything that looks different about Kirk Cousins, but there is always that in the back of my mind. Like, does age come for him? I don't think he's going to be distracted by the contract thing. That's always kind of the world he's lived in. But that is the one thing, like, because Cousins teeters on the edge of, if he has any drop off in arm strength, he's not going to be good anymore, right? I mean, if he goes from, because his arm is decent now, but if it goes to below average, it's not like he has mobility or anticipation or any of these other skills that are going to make up for it to be like Drew Brees or something, or Tom Brady or something. So that is one thing I'm kind of monitoring a little bit, is just like last year, some balls floated on him that maybe wouldn't have, but overall, I would still say that he's probably predictable to be the same quarterback. It's just things that could be potential factors.
Yeah, I think there were some factors in the guys you mentioned. I think maybe there was a little O-line breakdowns that kind of hurt them a little bit. And I mean, we'll talk about the O-line in a second, but But yeah, I mean, he's still mid 30s right now, 30, 34, 35. So I think I'll check back when it's like, 36, 37, 38, and see if that starts. Obviously, yeah, we got to keep checking because time comes for everybody, even Tom Brady. So yeah, we're gonna. But I'm with you. I like him this year. I like him this year as kind of like a set a quarterback that if you're going to wait and pass on the elite guys, maybe get him to pair with somebody else. And I already gave you one, but there's other guys to pair him with, Dak Prescott, other guys like that are also good options. You talk. Oh, by the way, you talked about him dressing as Optimus Prime. But then there's what, 5 Chains Kirk, which on the plane.
Yeah, and that does actually kind of connect to something interesting as well with the Vikings is, yeah, they did start putting chains on him and taking pictures of it and so forth, which became a bit of a trend. And I even saw a picture of Jared Goff wearing some chains, and I was like, I don't think that, no, it's not the same joke. Because Jared Goff is like the LA guy, he looks like Ryan Gosling or whatever. Like Kirk has the dad vibe. So it's funny when the guys put $100,000 chains on him. That's the joke, everyone. So don't try to copy it. But last year, there was something that happened, I think, with Kirk Cousins that hadn't really happened before, which was a buy-in to Kirk Cousins. Now, I know contract-wise, the front office has not bought into him for the future, but as far as the locker room went and his teammates went, they kind of galvanized around him last year. And I think also with him and Kevin O'Connell, there was a connection there that did not exist before because he always had this rotating cast of offensive personnel or coaching personnel. I mean, like the different offensive coordinators, different play callers. One year it's Stefanski, and then it's Kubiak, and then it's Clint Kubiak. And he's always had these kind of rotating cast around him, calling the plays and the offensive scheme. So now it's the same play caller, it's the same head coach, it's the same philosophy, and it's somebody that has played the position and was in his ear during the game, which I thought did make a difference in a lot of clutch moments. So how does that project to fantasy wise? That's hard to say, but I think just from what we saw, Cousins was more comfortable playing quarterback for the Vikings last year. And the biggest adjustment was really the new scheme. So now they've had a year in that scheme that I think they could be better. But I also think in order to win any games, they're going to have to be better offensively than they were last year because the defense is kind of in shambles at the moment.
Well, we love that for fantasy.
Yes, yes. That's why I bring it up.
Love that for fantasy. When they played the Lions, it was glorious. It was glorious. People started comparing it to Coors Field in baseball, so it was fantastic. Well, you already talked about Justin Jefferson. He's going off as the number 1 overall pick in most drafts right now. There's just nothing not to like about him. And but one thing I remember that you talked about last year, where people talked about, because it was Kevin O'Connell coming over from the McVay offense, and the Rams were just a year off of Cooper Kupp's just spectacular season. And even though there are different receivers, there were people talking about, is he going to see some of those Cooper Kupp, some of that Cooper Kupp deployment? With more familiarity in the offense, any new wrinkles that are being added for Justin Jefferson?
Yeah, I think they actually want it to be a little less than it was last year. Now that doesn't mean that he's gonna not be good or not put up great fantasy numbers. I was talking to Mike Clay of ESPN not too long ago about his projections and just how do you project someone coming off of a career year, but also kind of a historically good year. Usually we see a little bit of regression from that, but with Jefferson, it would still be regressing to the amazing. Like if he had 100 catches for 1,500 yards, like that's still wide receiver 1 type of season for people fantasy wise, but they didn't draft Jordan Addison for their health. They drafted him because they wanted an upgrade from Adam Thielen. That Adam Thielen last year was not really a viable downfield target at all. He was kind of an underneath 10 yards per catch, short type of receiver. And I think they want to take some of the attention away from Jefferson, but I also think they want somebody who they can rely on a little bit more when all the attention is on Jefferson. And if you look at the end of the season and the way defenses played against Jefferson, it was absurd. I mean, it was almost like Megatron. It was almost like Julio Jones, where I was surprised we didn't see two cornerbacks line up on him, with the straight double team like we've seen in the past from those guys. And maybe we might this year, but they were almost doing that. I mean, it was press coverage. It was a safety over the top every time. It was Kevin O'Connell mentioned this at the combine to us. He said that in the second half of the season, the teams played more shell coverages against them than anybody else in the league, and it wasn't close. And it was all about slowing down Jefferson. Probably some of the reason why TJ Hockenson got so many catches as well, because defenses were just saying Jefferson is not going to beat us down the field. And he still did sometimes, but teams like Green Bay, the Giants in the playoff game, were able to slow him down a little bit. Again, that doesn't mean that Jefferson is going to fall off. The guy is 24 years old. He's the most talented receiver in the league. And we'll see what happens with the contract extension for him. But if he doesn't get one, he is certainly going to be pushing to show everybody that he deserves even more money than he's probably getting offered right now. So I don't expect anything less from him. He's also not a guy who lets it go to his head. A superstar from day one. Every year he's improved on something. And I know that him missing OTAs brought a little bit of attention to him, but he came in minicamp and his first practice, he just was so much better than everyone else, as you would expect. I mean, he's the best receiver in the league, hands down. There's no question. But from a statistical perspective, I think that you would be reasonable to expect that they want to distribute the ball as an offense, because their goal is to just score more points than the other team and try to win. It's not to get him X number of catches. So if he, instead of gets 150 yards, gets 100 or 95 yards, but they win the game because they distributed the ball to Addison, to KJ Osborne, to TJ Hockenson, they're going to be happy. So I think they want to have those answers a little bit more than they had last year. So I might not project 1,900 yards. I might say more like 1,500 or 1,400, which again is still a phenomenal season. And the only other problem for fantasy players is when you get to the red zone, there is so much attention on Justin Jefferson in the red zone that it makes it pretty easy for anybody else to score except for him. So there is always going to be the Julio Jones type of problem that they're going to have, that he does not score a ton of touchdowns because of that. But aside from that, there's no reason to think he'll be anything less than sheer greatness.
Yeah, I mean, it led the league in red zone targets last year. Just an absolute monster. I mean, it's wheels up on him. I'm still kind of between him and Jamar Chase as that number one pick, because everything really sets up great for both of them. And yeah, I mean, there's great cases to be made for both of them to be just. And this maybe, I know we talked about this last year. They both have had, got that playful bet of who's going to be the first one to 2,000. Either one could have an outlier season, and maybe even both of them, and that would be phenomenal to watch. It'd be great for us, great for us on the fantasy side. You talked about TJ Hockenson, number 2 in targets for tight ends overall last season. Just had a phenomenal season once he came over. You talked about how he was such a beneficiary. I mean, really, with more familiarity in the offense, could he just take another step forward?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to step any farther forward than he did last year. He was excellent. He actually did one of the most impressive things that I've ever seen a football player do. He was traded to the Vikings on a Tuesday. So he arrived on a Tuesday, started practice on a Wednesday, and then played 60 snaps and caught 9 passes on a Sunday. And I have no idea how he did that at one of the most difficult positions. You guys know as well as anybody, how many tight ends are there in the league that are worth, even 50 catches? There's probably like 5 or 6 guys that you rely on every year. Like that's, I'm sure, why they go very high in fantasy drafts. And so Hockenson to even catch that many passes, but he was really, really good in that game, and then just continued that week after week after week. This is a guy who really understands football extremely well. And I did talk to him about this subject, and he said that one of the things is moving around a little bit more wide receiver, playing in the slot, and having more of a fluent understanding of the offense as opposed to just memorization. So you're bilingual. Imagine if I was trying to learn Spanish. I mean, you could teach me how to say phrases and sentences, right? But it would take me a really long time to actually be able to have conversations. And so that's kind of how he described it, is that he could last year memorize what he was supposed to do and then do it and say the words or run the routes. But now he feels like he's going to be fluent in it. I don't know if that results in more catches, because it's hard to have more catches than he had last year. At the same time, so much attention goes Jefferson's way, and there was this instant trust between Cousins and Hockenson that just, I don't know, sometimes two guys just have with each other. He knew where Hockenson was going to be at all times. I think that Hockenson could go down the field a little bit more than he did last year. He was averaging like 8 yards a catch because he was kind of that security blanket. But man, you even go to that playoff game and he catches 10 passes on 11 targets. So even if you're looking at those statistics for the regular season, add that in there, and that's like 110 catch pace or something. I don't think it'll quite get there because they do want to spread the ball to probably Jordan Addison a little bit as well. But I would not be the least bit surprised if TJ Hockenson is not only kind of wide receiver too, in a way, in this offense because of his chemistry with Cousins, but also among the top 3 in tight end targets. Would not surprise me at all.
No, I think he's a big play this year. And one of my friends on the fantasy analysts, Joey Wright, that he's like that's his poster child for this season. So I think it's because he also loves the hair. So
oh yeah, very impressive, very
impressive
Viking.
So you also talked about Jordan Addison coming off of just a great college career, Fred Paletnikoff Award winner as in his sophomore season at Pittsburgh, last year at USC, kind of an uneven year, but now he's coming in into I think a lot of people are expecting he's going to get Adam Thielen's targets and Adam Thielen's role. I know he's dealing with he dealt with a little bit of an injury during minicamp and the OTAs beforehand. Is that a concern going into training camp, that it could be something that lingers and maybe kind of slows him down at the beginning of the season?
I would say yes and no. Kevin O'Connell told us that they expect him to be a full go when it comes to training camp, and that it was more precautionary than anything. They didn't want him to have a more serious injury by kind of pushing him and forcing him out there. Where it is a little bit of a concern is that these things all build on each other. So I don't blame any fans who don't pay attention to OTAs or mini camp or whatever else, but there's this like long process to understanding the whole offense and where you fit and everything else, that TJ Hockenson is maybe enough of a veteran to come in and get it quickly and fit in. But for rookies, that's very hard. So if you start even a little bit behind and you're not getting it in the muscles, running the routes you're supposed to run, memorizing it, and then executing it out there, you are starting from a little bit behind of where everybody else is. Now, he was in the meetings, he was at the practices, he was watching, he was taking it all in, mental reps, if you will, but it's not quite the same. Now, that doesn't mean that like there's still plenty of time. It doesn't mean it's going to be a huge problem, but he also is 170 pounds, and I've never seen a wide receiver this small. I've seen guys who are short and, like Stephon Diggs isn't all that tall, but usually stocky, or like Jarius Wright. They had KJ Osborne's not that tall, but when you look at the kind of size of someone like KJ Osborne, he's more built like a running back if you're going to be undersized. Addison is smaller than anyone I've ever seen at the position. So you kind of wonder a little bit how that transition is going to go. Now, Devontae Smith has had a lot of success. He was also a top 10 draft pick. I think there's a little more pedigree there. I think there's a lot to like about Jordan Addison's role and how he can step in, play in the slot a lot, that they can have him motioning and getting a lot of favorable matchups because Justin Jefferson's going to draw so much attention. And I also think if you watch the guy's film, go back to the UCLA game or a year before where he had a huge game, Pitt versus Virginia, which I wrote a story about, where he had 4 touchdowns. I mean, he tracks the ball well. He's a football junkie. He's a route running junkie. And what he really understands, and I saw there was a Travis Kelce video where he's talking about this, he really understands the pace of a route. So it's not just like I run as fast as I can into a slant. It's sort of like a setting up your defender to hit the break at the exact right time, like an Iverson crossover or something, where there's just a real feel for the game that this guy has. So even though there's a little bit of like, how quick is he going to start out the gate, where we've seen even Stephon Diggs, even Justin Jefferson right out of the gate, first couple of weeks did not thrive as rookies. So sometimes it does take a little while. And then there is a little bit of the injury concern because he is so small. But when you watch the tape from college and you look at the guy's skill set, his route running, his ball tracking, and the offense that he's going to be put in, which should offer a lot of opportunity, I think it's fair to expect a good rookie season. You never know with rookies, but I think with him, he's in about as favorable of a situation as anybody in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, he's not going to get double teamed. he's,
Right.
he's not going to get the top defender. He's not going to get shadow coverage. It's just it's a dream. Yeah, you just want him to be healthy. And want him to be healthy. You mentioned mental reps, but I think, I think those are going to be really important to turn into mental and physical reps once he gets into that. He's a guy I'm going to be really, keeping an eye on what you're telling us coming from training camp on this one. So this is one, because once we get into the mid to late August, that's going to be the nitty gritty time for those fantasy drafts. I think when it comes to the receiving core, I mean, I think we kind of covered, all the major fantasy relevant players. Would you agree?
Sort of. There is a little bit of a debate that we've been having on the sideline about whether Addison or KJ Osborne will come up with more catches this year. And I think KJ Osborne could be a low-key guy for people to draft in fantasy because, well, there is the injury factor with someone like Addison. And even if you compare him to like Treylon Burks or Jahan Dotson, like those guys had good rookie seasons and got like 30 something catches because they were banged up and because there is a tough transition to the NFL. If that were to happen, KJ Osborne is really in the limelight here. And the other thing is too, that Kirk Cousins and KJ Osborne have built a thing over the years here. And every time Cousins talks about Osborne, he just gushes praise about KJ Osborne, almost like, don't forget coaching staff. Like, I want this guy to get the football. And I've been thinking that it's possible that KJ Osborne ends up with more receptions at the end of the year. Maybe it ends up split. Maybe it's 50 catches for this guy and 52 for that guy. I don't know. But I think when you draft a receiver in the first round, the assumption is, oh man, they're just going to throw this guy the football all the time. But Osborne is a very highly intelligent and proven player. It's a complicated offense for receivers. I asked Keenan McCardle, their receivers coach, about this, and he said that it is a very complicated offense for receivers. So already Addison's starting a little bit from behind. So if Addison, I think is more gifted, of course, and could be long-term a better player. And Osborne's going to be a free agent after this year. But just for year one purposes, maybe even just the first half of the season, I think it could be Osborne. Now, this is a June prognostication before I've seen training camp. So who knows? That could change. But it's just something that's kind of been a point of conversation for us here.
No, I think it's awesome. And actually, it's going to be KJ Osborne is a guy to keep in mind for best ball drafts, underdog. Don't forget, Familia 23, best ball drafts, and maybe even for DFS lineups. You could be a cheap play, when it's going to be a high volume game, especially a home game for the Vikings. He could be that guy who comes in and gets 100, gets 3 catches, but one of them is a 60-yarder for a touchdown, and you cash that way because he's a cheap play on DFS. So definitely someone to keep in mind there. Okay, so we buried the secondary lead a little bit. The running backs, there was the big trade, Dalvin Cook. The release of Dalvin Cook. And now I think a lot of people are expecting that a lot of people in the fantasy community are expecting that the load that Dalvin Cook has carried over the past several years to be one of the elite running backs in the game, that it's now just going to shift to Alexander Mattison. I'm a little leery of doing that, but I want you to kind of enlighten me a little bit.
Yeah, I think that they really like Alexander Mattison. And we talk about trust and intelligence and how important those are for getting on the field for a complex offensive scheme. And Mattison sort of checks those boxes. I think that's why they wanted him back. It's not that he's going to get a bunch of Adrian Peterson 75-yard touchdowns. That's not really who he is. He's much more of a Leroy Horde than he is a Robert Smith. To go back in Vikings history a little bit there, more of a grounded pound type of guy, but he's a really good pass catcher. He's a really good pass blocker. And if you're going to throw 65% of the time, those things are going to be at the front of your mind, I think, more than just yards per carry and so forth. But I do think that he has been very good when he has taken on that sort of starter role. There's been maybe, 10 games where he's come in and had to carry a significant load, whether it's, an injury to Dalvin Cook or however. I mean, usually if Dalvin Cook was in, he was getting all of the carries. I'm sure everybody in the fantasy world knows that. But anytime Mattison had to step in, he was very good. I mean, we saw 100-yard games from him, games where he averaged 5 yards a carry. So I think there is a lot of trust and belief in him. Behind him, though, are two very intriguing guys. And so, Kene Nwangwu is like 6'1" and 200 pounds and runs a 4.3. You just don't see human beings like that size running that fast. Track star. And even though he didn't play a ton of football at Iowa State, he averaged like 7 yards a carry or something crazy. And then he hasn't gotten many opportunities, but he's one of the best kick returners in the league. So you see the natural ability with the football. And when Dalvin Cook is playing, he was just taking up all the carries. They weren't ever going to use anybody else. But now this opportunity is here for that natural physical gift of Kene Nwangwu to maybe take a step after a couple of years of development to take some carries away from Alexander Mattison. And then they also drafted Ty Chandler last year, and it was a 5th-round pick, which doesn't catch many people's attention. But then in training camp, he was getting a lot of reps with the first team. And then in preseason games, he was outstanding. So he caught their attention as well. So it kind of comes down to, can they trust them first? And that's going to be the biggest thing with Nwangwu and Chandler if they want to get on the field. But both of them have an explosiveness to them that I think does give them a chance to take carries away. So I do think it's still going to be vast majority Mattison getting the ball, but there is an opportunity to have kind of a 3-man rotation, or even for one of those guys to beat the other guy out in training camp. I just don't know who yet. But if one of those guys understands the offense a little bit better, they both have explosive capabilities. So maybe if you're in some sort of like really deep draft, or maybe it's just like a thing where you keep an eye on the waiver wire and keep an eye on this Vikings situation, because if Mattison does get banged up, or if he isn't very effective, these other two guys are going to be a part of it. And I also think that last year they did a horrendous job of throwing the ball to the running backs that Kevin O'Connell very likely wants to improve this year.
No, and I think that also just keep in mind, I mean, you talked about the possibility of there being a little somewhat of a committee. O'Connell comes from McVay, which everything goes up to the Shanahan coaching tree, which I mean, they do like to run the ball, but they don't necessarily want to do it with a bell cow if they don't have a Dalvin Cook or a Terrell Davis or a Clinton Portis or someone like that, or Christian McCaffrey is now with the 49ers. So good. I'm glad. Something to keep in mind there. So I want to get a kind of the state of the offensive line. What one of the better lines in the NFL. Kind of how are they shaping up from a health standpoint and returning?
Yeah, the way I put it is they could be one of the better lines. And I don't think they were last year, but it's weird to explain because the tackles are so good. I mean, this is the best tackle combination in the NFL with Brian O'Neill and Christian Darrisaw. Now, O'Neill is coming off of an Achilles injury. He's expected to be good to go for training camp. He also was doing the mental reps during minicamp and so forth. So he avoided the full Achilles tear. He should be back, but starting from behind a little bit. And we always just assume that these players coming back from injuries will just be fine, as if it's like Madden and you're out for a couple weeks and then the guy's just back in. There is a transition there usually, but Darrisaw, he was a top 5 tackle last season. O'Neill had already established himself as an elite right tackle, but the interior still has a lot of question marks. At right guard, Ed Ingram allowed more sacks than anyone ever in the PFF era. 11 sacks in a season, tied for the most ever since they've been tracking sacks allowed. So that's not great. And what you saw is that teams knew it. Defenses knew it. They knew that you're not going to really attack Darrisaw or O'Neill, that if you send a lot of stunts, twists, blitzes up the middle, it was inexperienced. So Ingram was a rookie, and the left guard, Ezra Cleveland, was only in his second season playing left guard. He was a terrific run blocker, but as a pass blocker, still a little sketchy when it comes to dealing with those blitzes and everything else. Also, everybody knows by now that Kirk Cousins isn't running away from you and me when it comes to a pass rush. I mean, so everyone attacks the middle against him, kind of the way that they would try to with Drew Brees, blitzing up the middle, shorter quarterback, not mobile. I mean, Brees obviously handled it for most of his career, but I think in the playoffs, some teams, including the Vikings, when they played him, kind of got him that way by sending more people up the middle. And then they returned Garrett Bradbury, their center, who had by far his best season of his career. But was that a matchup thing for the reason, or was it the scheme fit, or was it that everyone was going after the guards instead of him? Like, I'm not really sure. Sometimes these samples can be pretty small for one individual season, and that can change. And if you look at the defensive tackles that they're going to face, you got Chris Jones, you got Grady Jarrett, you got Kenny Clark. I mean, there's going to be kind of a murderer's row of pass rushers there. So what it really comes down to is, if those guys kind of gel together and we see the right and left guard take steps forward, as often we do in offensive lines, it can take a couple of years for them to gel. They could be a really, really good offensive line. If they don't, and it's the same as last year, then they're mediocre despite having the best tackle combination in the league.
Yeah, and they're going to need to, because as you said, this is a team that's going to throw more than 600 times this season. So we need to, and yeah, I think Kirk Cousins had like 12 rushing yards last year. So you don't, keep the king upright, keep the guy upright so that he could do his shirtless chain dances afterwards. You talked about it a little bit already. The defense, I mean, we're expecting a lot of shootouts, which again, love it. It's a young secondary. How about against the run?
Yeah, I mean, I think everything is really unclear against the run, against the pass, the scheme, everything. I mean, it's all basically new because they lost Delvin Tomlinson, Zadarius Smith. We still don't know what's going to happen with Danielle Hunter. He was holding out with his contract issue. Patrick Peterson is gone. Byron Murphy replaces him. I think Murphy's going to play a lot in the slot, so it's going to leave the outside to Caleb Evans, who was a fourth rounder from last year. Andrew Booth Jr. maybe could also be Mekhi Blackman, who was drafted in the third round out of USC this year and was taking a lot of the reps in minicamp. And then at the safety position, it's unclear whether it's going to be Cam Bynum or Lewis Seen, who they drafted in the first round. But Seen was the fourth string safety in minicamp, which is not really a great sign for where he's going to go. But there's so many players all across this team where you go, I don't really know what's going to happen. I do know that losing Delvin Tomlinson is bad. Delvin Tomlinson is a terrific player. You talk about stopping the run, just a terrific player. I think one of the better defensive tackles overall, maybe not sacks wise, but overall as a player, created pressure, stuffed multiple gaps, could play 3-tech, could play nose, and now he's gone. So now they're trying to fill this spot they drafted a guy, Jacqueline Roy. There's Harrison Phillips, who's a pretty solid run stuffer. Kairos Tonga was a guy that they picked up. If people don't know these names, I'm not surprised. Like, you'd have to be covering the team to know some of these players. And the point just being that that's a lot of unproven guys. And I think that it's hard to see them getting a lot of sacks with losing Zadarius Smith. It's also hard to see them being a good run stopping team with Eric Kendricks being gone as well, and Delvin Tomlinson. I mean, I think this defense is going to struggle in pretty much all areas, except for Brian Flores trying to dial up as many blitzes as he can to create some big plays, kind of like a home run hitter who strikes out a lot. I think that that's what they could be this season, but I think it's going to be a tough go. And if you're playing fantasy with the running backs who are going up against the Vikings, I suspect that they're going to have a lot of success this year.
Oh man. Well, this has been a successful show already, mi amigo. As we talked about last year, any recent Mexican food takes or recent discoveries? I mean, you've talked about it, and even since we talked, I've heard from multiple people how Minnesota is one of the great eating cities anywhere. So please be the Chamber of Commerce right now for Mexican food in the year
okay,
next.
so yes, there are, even in my neighborhood, there's 3 places. So last time I told you we had kind of one, but I have expanded out to a couple other places. There's one sit down place, a lot of kind of classic Mexican music, real vibe there. And then there's one of those places that you kind of walk up, make your order, kind of a little more fast food-ish. But I will tell you my discovery recently is I mostly stuck with pretty safe kind of quesadilla, but I have expanded out to the shrimp game in Mexican food. And I gotta say, I was leaving a lot on the table there. And I was actually in LA recently, and I had a burrito that was it was rice, shrimp, it was vegetables, some tomato in there, and some what's the other one that's used a lot? I'm trying to think what else was in there, but it's like
avocado,
this big,
avocado, or
yeah, might have been, yeah, whatever. I don't know, but it was just stuffed with shrimp, like grilled shrimp. It was fantastic. I mean, I feel disappointed in myself that I had not really gone all in on that. So that's kind of what I'm doing right now. But definitely a big fan of the Mexican food game here.
Oh man, yeah. The seafood, yeah. And if you ever get down to San Diego, just fill yourself on fish tacos, because it's just that is just nirvana for fish tacos. It's like flying first class. You're just ruined for everywhere else. Like I go to San Diego, I don't have fish tacos very often here because I wait to have them in San Diego. And yeah, just one of the great places. Oh yeah. And this has been fantastic, mi amigo. Please pump everything you got you got coming out. Please pump the book one more time.
Sure. So I have, purpleinsider.com is a great place to find everything. If you just go there, it's got the podcast, written articles, the link to the YouTube. So everything is there. And yes, I did write a book about the history and impact of Pro Football Focus, which is a story that I don't think people really know. Like, we use PFF all the time. It's up in my tabs right now. Whether you're a reporter, a fantasy player, or whatever, we use PFF all the time as consumers. But I think what you've probably heard before is that they work with teams. They don't really talk about what they do with teams. So I kind of went behind the curtain and spent a year and a half covering their business, finding out where they came from, how they got to where they are, their impact, and the analytics kind of revolution that we've seen in the NFL. And it is a much crazier story than you'd ever expect. And I want to just leave that as a tease, but you will not believe some of the ways that they got to where they are. And so that was a really fun project. It's coming out in October, but it is available for pre-sale now. It is called Football is a Numbers Game, Pro Football Focus, and How a Data-Driven Approach Shook Up the Sport. So Football is a Numbers Game. Amazon, Google, wherever you get your books, you could pre-order it now. But it's a wild story, man. We all use PFF.com, but what they do behind the scenes, their impact, their influence with teams, and how they got here is something that I actually didn't even know when I started writing it. I kind of pitched the idea of writing about it to the founder, Neil Hornsby. And then once I started reporting on it, I was like, I think that people are really going to want to know what has been going on with this company and how teams are using it and how much teams have dived deep into the analytics world, that analytics are having so much more of an impact on what's going on in the NFL than people realize.
Oh yeah, it's not just baseball, Familia. It's not just baseball. Yeah, the PFF. I use PFF all the time. One of the many. Also, our amigos of Fantasy Points also came out with some, their own data tools. So it's the numbers help us so much when it comes to when it comes to fantasy. But you know what? These kind of shows, the inside that we get from you being boots on the ground, giving us kind of, taking us behind the scenes on the visually on what you're seeing at training camp and what you're seeing on the practice fields. It's just fantastic. Mi amigo, one more time, I'm going to give you a big un millón de gracias. Thank you so much. And thank you everybody for joining us. Also, make sure one more time, you're following us on YouTube. Get that Familia FFB YouTube page. Give us that thumbs up. Hit that subscriber button, set those notifications, because these are coming out hot and heavy all the time. And one more time, make sure you're going to underdogfantasy.com. Use that promo code Familia23 and can match you up to that first $100 deposit that you have. Again, you can find me at Jorge Martin 17 on Twitter, Familia FFB everywhere else on the socials, and FamiliaFFB.com. Going to keep having some content coming out. So thank you once again to Mateo, and muchas gracias to everybody for joining us. And remember, todos somos familia. Salud.